And we're live. David, thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to this conversation and everything that we're going to get into today.
Yeah, man, I'm fired up. I love doing these, especially on, I don't know if this gets released on Fridays, but it's finished Friday for us right now as we're recording. And I'm a big Friday guy, so I love connecting with people that have the right energy on Friday. It gives me that extra boost that we all need, brother. So I'm jacked up.
Yeah, likewise. And that's exactly it. When I spoke to you the first time, the main thing that I noticed is your energy. And I'm pretty sure you get that all the time. And that energy definitely comes across. So I'm glad I caught you on a Friday as well. And I'm not sure if this will be released on a Friday. It all depends on our schedule and whatnot. But I'm glad I caught you on a Friday. So the conversation's on a Friday. That's all that matters. So I know you're going to bring that
That's it.
energy. Uh,
Absolutely.
for anybody who doesn't know who you are, or hasn't come across your work, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, man. So most people just call me Kitch. I don't think anybody's called me David since probably my mother or when I'm in serious trouble. So I just go by Kitch or Coach Kitch, whichever. But I'm the founder and president of Edge Leadership Academy, and what Edge is a consulting firm. So what we do is anything that has to do with leadership, culture, high performance, we have our hands in it in one way or another. And I'm sure we'll dive more into that. So I don't want to get too in depth. But basically, we have three legs to the business, three arms, if you will. We have our corporate side, which is the majority of our business, where we work with, whether it's C-suite management, employee engagement, different types of culture workshops, one-on-one coachings, things like that. And then we have our athletic side, where we do a lot of the same, whether it's culture workshops, team building, leadership development programs, and how to implement leadership councils within programs, and then also work with like administrators and coaches. And so we do a lot of coach to coaches as well. And then we have our individual side, which is our third leg of the business, which is for anybody that's a high performer, anybody that's trying to live life in the arena. Like, we want to connect, and we want to connect you with other people that can help you do that. And so that's kind of the 30,000 foot view of the business. But aside from that, man, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a friend, and so I say the business is what I do. It's not who I am. But yeah, man, that's the Reader's Digest version, and we can dive into any of that you want to kind of unpack.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely will. One thing that I love is how clear cut the business is and how you've structured all the different aspects of the business. I think this is something, systemization and really structuring the business is something a lot of entrepreneurs are missing from what I see from a lot of business owners that we work with, and just what I see from even, friends of mine who are in the business world. It's not as systemized and as structured. Again, that's another thing that really stood out to me in my notes last time I spoke with you. One was the energy. The next was the systemization and structure of the business, because I remember you told me about the different legs of the business last time as well. So I love that. And I want to ask you more about that as well. But first things first, how did all of this start for you? How did you even, before the business world, what got you into this?
Yeah, brother, it was a long kind of roller coaster of a ride that got me here. So I graduated college. Let me back up and put a little context to everything. I came from a single parent household, right? So I was born to a single mother. Never met my biological father. My stepfather, who was my brother's biological father, struggled with addiction, and so we saw a lot of things in the house at a young age that probably shouldn't have seen. And I became the man of the house at 11 years old, and so leadership was kind of something that was forced upon me in the early days. And then it's something that I really grew to appreciate and learn to replicate and learn to really explore, from an academic and from an anecdotal standpoint. And so, went through my typical career, high school into college, and got the opportunity to play college football. So obviously had athletics as a large part of my life growing up. And we all know how important leadership and culture is when it comes to, playing team sports or individual sports, even for that matter. Um, Graduated college and got into IT sales.
Mm.
And I was making money, hand over fist, like most people were. It was 2000, would have been 2013, 2014. So the tech, the IT boom was really just taking off. Like, it was like cloud solutions, all these different things were first getting introduced to enterprises. And so we were out selling cloud solutions, cloud-based CRMs and different things like that. And so we were cleaning up, especially in
Right.
rural and central Pennsylvania. I mean, these people had no idea what that was.
Yeah.
And
That was
so we're
perfect
going
timing
into
for
these.
that space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going into these business, and we're crushing it. And so I'm in this for about a year, and I'm at a Christmas party, and it was, our office Christmas party. So I'm watching everybody, and they're, drinking scotch and smoking cigars and having a good time. And I was just like, man, this is not the future that I want. Like, this isn't what I want
Mm.
to do, and I had been coaching football on the side as just kind of, something to do. I was helping out a former high school coach of mine. So I decided I want to be a coach. Like that's where I want to be. I love the game. I love it's really weird, but I love the emotional sobriety of looking at a scoreboard and seeing all zeros on it, right? So like the game's
Mhm.
over, you either won or you lost, and there's nothing you can do. And I think that that moment is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I kind of chase that in other areas of my life now. But regardless, I really loved coaching and I loved being in the weight room and the process behind the training, right? Like the methodologies. And so I got into strength and conditioning and I had a business degree. So I didn't have an exercise science degree. I didn't have a bio degree, none of the traditional routes. And so what I had to do was I literally wrote a letter to every Division I school on the East Coast. And I said, hey, I'll quit my job and come work for you for free if you give me an opportunity to come learn from you. And so that's what I did, man. I quit my job and I moved into a 1 bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh. And that launched a 10-year career in college strength and conditioning. And so I went from being, having no background, being older than all the other quote unquote interns because I had already graduated college. I was out a year. Um, and flash forward 2 years, I was the youngest head strength coach in the country. And then from there, man, it was a wild ride. I got the opportunity to coach in Division I and spent a lot of time around high performing people and high performing cultures and these environments that pushed you to explore the edges, right? They pushed you to find like what's that 1% difference. And so I really I loved it, and it really energized me, and it put more emphasis on self development and becoming the best version of myself. And so that's where this all started, right? And then through
Mhm.
that, had the opportunity to build leadership councils, do leadership development, a lot of culture work within our programs. And I had a young man come to me my last season and he said, Coach, I've been the best player on every team I've ever been on. And everybody's always telling me to lead, but nobody ever taught me how. And that was like, every entrepreneur has that light bulb moment. That was it for me. Like, I was like, oh, okay. So this young man, who in my opinion was the best leader that I had ever coached, and if he
Mhm.
felt that way, that means he probably represents other people. There's probably a bigger population here, right? And then as I explored it more, what I realized was I started to connect the dots. And I'm like, oh, I hear this from pro scouts all the time when they come in and look at our players, that they want leaders, right? I hear this from administrators when they're talking about our coaches, that they want leaders. I hear this from all these different people. And so now I'm like, all right, this is definitely representative of a bigger population. So there's a business opportunity here. And then the pandemic hit. And at that level, you're tied to your head coach. And so our head coach moved on and took another job. And so I had an opportunity. It was either stay and interview for my job and hope that the new guy kept me, or roll the dice in the middle of the pandemic and see if I could start a business. And so, I went with my gut and I rolled the dice and enrolled in PhD courses in psychology and applied for an LLC and started putting out content. And then here we are, man, 3 years later.
That's an amazing story. There's so much there that I want to dig into. Every few minutes, I wanted to stop and interrupt you, but I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna let him roll, and then we'll go back and forth here. But I love that. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of things that really stand out to me that I want to dig into. First things first, you got into IT sales when you were younger, before all of this happened. Tell me a bit about the sales experience. What are some lessons you drew from sales? Because I come from a very sales heavy background, and
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. And that experience of being at the Christmas party and feeling like, I don't want to be here, or I don't want this to be my career or my life. I've had that exact same experience with actually multiple different industries where I've been in sales and gone to the Christmas party because I was one of the top performers, and then just sitting there and looking at, some of the sales guys drinking and whatnot, and thinking to myself, this is not it. This is not the end goal for me. So when you said that, I actually felt that on a very visceral level. So very relatable for me, and I'm sure other people who have been in sales. But from your sales experience, what are some things that you drew? What are some lessons that maybe you still carry with yourself today?
Oh, dude, it was so vital to my development. So vital because the way our company was structured was we got our warm lead list, right, from our lead gen team and the people that were involved in that. So we got our warm lead list. And then as a sales rep, basically what most of the sales reps would do would be sit in the office and they go through their calls, right? And they just go through and, do your spiel, get hung up on the whole deal, right? We've all been there.
Mhm.
And they would just move on. And so what I learned very quickly was like, oh, wait a minute, if I take everybody that said no to me on the phone and I put them on a separate list, and then I just plan on being out of the office and I go do drop bys at all these places, I can turn these no's into yeses, right? So it became a game for me. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was successful at it early was I kind of figured out like, now this is the people business. Like we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
sell them a product that at this time they don't understand. And we're trying to do it over the phone. And even to this day, like trying to explain the cloud to somebody is not it's not an easy thing, especially somebody
Sure.
who is a dog food manufacturer or a hospital. Like I don't understand it. Right. So I'm
Mhm.
like, no, I gotta rely on my relatability. I gotta rely on my personality, right? So what I would do would be I would take that list and then I would make all my calls on Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'd hit the road, man, and I would just drive and I'd go to all these places. And did I still get no's? Absolutely. Listen, I would get a ton of no's. But I learned valuable skills in that, right? Resiliency, the ability to not take no personal, the ability to read between the lines and figure out what kind of no you're getting. Like,
Mhm.
is it a no? Is it a no forever? Is it a no because I don't understand? Is it a no because it's not the right time?
Mhm.
Like what's the reason, you know? And so there's a lot of lessons that I learned from that. And I think any entrepreneur, if you get the opportunity to sell door to door, do it. I mean,
Mhm.
it is such a valuable skill. And it teaches you an abundance mindset, right? Because you have to. It's the only way you survive. And
Mhm.
so I used to get excited, like I'm like, all right, I got 27 no's before lunch. That means after I eat this sandwich, I'm gonna get a yes somewhere because it's a numbers game, right?
Mhm.
Somebody's gonna schedule a demo here, so I'm gonna be rocking and rolling, right?
Mhm.
And then by maintaining that, it kept my fire lit, and then it became a volume game, and then it just became a numbers game, and it was like, oh, I'm just doing more sales calls than you guys. That's why
Mhm.
I'm making money, right?
Right.
And so yeah, there's a ton of lessons that you get from that. Learning to build trust really quickly, you know,
Mhm.
learning to, because you got first impressions matter, right?
Mhm.
So being able to build that trust and build that relationship, be somebody that people want to do business with.
Mhm.
There's a ton of lessons, man. I could talk for hours about the things I learned, you know, driving, because you would refine your sales pitch in between each call, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just you and it's just me and my Jeep. So like I'm driving and I'm like, okay, what went wrong with that one? I didn't like the way I handled that first objection. Like I could have done this differently, or I could have guided that conversation a little bit better this way. And then it was, oh, I got to do more homework, right? So it's like I'm driving and I'm Googling the senior staff of the business that I'm going to. And it's like, all right, this dude, his son plays football at, you know, XYZ University. I'm going to go in there and hit the football thing right off the bat and try and get in the room using that. Right. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of little things that I learned that I still use. I use them as a coach and I use them now as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I love sales, because it's so transferable to everything else that you do. It's transferable to your day-to-day life, transferable to how you manage relationships in your personal life, transferable to basically anytime you want to get an idea across to anybody, you're selling. Anytime you want something from somebody, you're selling. It's all sales. So it's very transferable. And I mean, you mentioned a lot of great points. I mean, even besides the ones you actually listed, through explaining your experience, you said a lot of great things. A few that I really love and I think are going to be helpful to everybody else, I just want to reiterate. One is that you took a different approach. Everybody's sitting there making cold calls. And again, of course, I've been there. I've built cold calling teams. I was doing B2B door to door way before I did B2C door to door. So I'm very familiar with both sides of it as well. And, you know, you said, you know, I'm not going to just take that as a list of no's. I'm going to go try a different approach and see if I can get in front of these people, especially knowing your market, right? Like you said, they're busier in their companies and their businesses. They're not so into, you know, picking up the phone and explaining what cloud and all that software is one thing. Explaining why they should care is a whole different thing. So trying to get both messages across on the phone might be a bit difficult. So you might have to get in, you know, drop in on in person and do that. So I love that you took that approach. The other thing you said is you gamified it. That was one thing that always worked really well for me, because I'm very competitive. I can tell you are as well, right?
Yep.
And we want to win. If we're in sales, we want to be the top performers, just like in business and anything else. And I think me gamifying some of my sales results and targets for myself was very helpful in sales. So for any young salespeople watching this, or anybody who's in sales or business, I would suggest, you know, have your clear targets and whatnot, and then gamify it, right? And then making those micro adjustments in between the sales calls or in between appointments and getting incrementally better. And above all that, it's a numbers game. You know, my first mentor that had a lasting impact on me, Jim Rohn, used to always say the law of averages, right? The more you do something, you'll start to find an average. And once you find that average, the more you work on and develop the skills, that average becomes better. And it's very simple philosophy that just applies. So I love that. I knew you're going to share some gems. That's why I wanted to dig into the sales experience. But then you got into becoming a strength coach. You again went out on a limb and wrote those letters to all these different colleges and whatnot. So it's that same philosophy of, taking that list and going to drop in face to face. It's the same thing, writing those personal letters to every single school and wanting to put yourself out there. What were some of the initial challenges in completely pivoting and getting yourself in that new opportunity, new position? What were some things you had to overcome that you think would be relatable to the average person listening?
Yeah, I think the first thing that was glaring to me was the imposter syndrome, right? That was the first thing, like walking in the door. And I had coached, I had the people skills, I had that down. Like I had been around people, I'd been part of athletics, like that was home to me. I was comfortable in a weight room, I was comfortable on a field. What I didn't realize was when we started to have staff meetings, how big the gap was, the knowledge gap. Because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a background in exercise science, I didn't have a background in biology, I didn't have a background in anatomy. I didn't know the names of these muscle groups. I didn't know why we were doing what we were doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was a big thing that I had to overcome. And so I would go home every single night and study. I bought the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning textbook, which is what you're tested on to get your certification. And I literally read it page by page, cover to cover, over and over and over. Made myself a 150-page study guide, and I would study that day after day. The other thing I did was I was like, okay, while I'm closing this knowledge gap, I need to lean into my strengths to cover for that because I don't have the knowledge right now. So the other thing I did is I went through and I made flashcards of each of the athletes. So each of the players with like their name, hometown, facts about them, whatever. So that if I maybe wasn't the smartest guy when it came to the X's and O's and the anatomy and the physiology, I was going to be the relationship guy. I was going to be relatable. Like there was going to be something until I could close that gap. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were the biggest challenges that I had. And I was so fortunate to have such a great mentor, man. He threw us right in the fire as soon as we got there. Like it was a lot of times when you go to a Division I university, especially as an unpaid volunteer, they don't let you coach. It's like, no, you can clean up, you can run you can clean the protein machine, you can do this, this, and this, but you're not actually coaching anybody. Um, versus my boss, yeah, he made us do that stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, I was in there scrubbing protein machines and doing that stuff. But he also gave us the opportunity to coach. And he pulled me aside the first day and said, listen, I know you're different than everybody else. I know you're older, you have a different energy about you. Like I can see it and I can feel it. He said, so what I want for you is to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. And so that means you can coach any team here except football. You can pick. Right. So because he knew I was familiar with football, he's like, no, you need to get out and do something different. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was a lot of it. Um, and those were some of the early lessons. There was always new things to explore, but the biggest thing that I overcame at the beginning was just that imposter syndrome and recognizing like the knowledge gap is what's holding me back right now. If I can close this, I already have the people skills down. I'll blow everybody else out of the water. It'll be me and then everybody else, and that's what happened.
Yeah, to linger on that imposter syndrome, because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners feel that. What are some ways you would recommend nowadays if you're talking to beginner business owners, beginner entrepreneurs? How would you recommend they handle that imposter syndrome? Because I think everybody has that at all
Yeah,
levels. So, what would be your
I,
thoughts
I
on how
still
to
get
handle
it.
that?
Yeah, man, I still get it. There's still times where I'm standing in front of a boardroom or, I'm around people where their bank account could eat my bank account. And I'm like, I don't know about this one. I probably shouldn't. And I hear those voices start to creep up. But I think the first thing that you need to do is be able to learn to observe your thoughts and not identify with them. Right. And,
Mhm.
and so learning to challenge my thoughts was one of the biggest things that I had to do of, when you hear that little voice, the boogeyman in the back of your head saying, hey, you can't do this or you don't belong here. Like challenge that. Be like, based on what? Because here's the thing, and this is the way that I look at it, and entrepreneurs can look at it this way too. You've been successful in your life up to this point.
Mhm.
So there's no data to suggest that you're going to crash and burn today. There's no data. So why are we allowing that thought to take root, right? And so what I try and do is kind of flip it and go the opposite. So I try and keep a list in my head of evidence of things that I've done that are hard things, that are difficult things, that are things that I've been successful in. And then when I'm in those moments of imposter syndrome, I can look back at those things and I can say, oh no, I have undisputable empirical data that says, I'm a bad dude. I can
Hmm.
get this done, right? And so that's the first step, but it's managing that internal dialogue, right? And then the second part is you don't have to be confident in your skills. You just got to be confident that you're willing to do the work. Like I wasn't confident in my skills as a businessman when I first started this. I was just confident that I knew nobody else was willing to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and stay up until 11 o'clock at night doing the work, right? Like
Hmm.
that's what it was. It had nothing to do with my actual skill set. I wasn't confident in that at all. I knew nothing. I didn't have
Hmm.
QuickBooks for the first year. I was doing my paper. Like my first tax appointment was a nightmare.
Hmm.
Like I'm figuring this stuff out as I go. But what I knew was, okay, I'm confident because I know I'm willing to do the work. I'm confident because I know that every single day I'm going to get exponentially better at this. And so it's not as scary anymore. Right. And so again, it's an abstract thought, but it's reminding yourself that if I commit to this process, the person that I'm going to be on the other side of this is the person that is willing and able to take care of all these challenges, right? And it's just expanding your depth and expanding your threshold for discomfort.
Yeah, I think the level of wisdom that you have right now is a clear sign of the self development that you've done. And you talked about self development earlier, right? And I think the more you can pour into yourself, the more you can handle situations like this and look at the positive side of things, as opposed to looking for reasons why you shouldn't be there. You're looking for reasons why you are there and how you're going to, get into that next stage or next chapter. So let's talk about self development for a second. How did that journey start for you? And I want to get into psychology as well because I'm very interested in that. But just
Yeah.
the self development route, because I know you brought it up earlier. How important has that role been for you? What type of self development have you done? Do you do today? Do you have any routines or specific structures? How do you work on yourself?
Yeah, man, it was massive in my journey, massive. So like I said, growing up, I grew up in a single parent household, and so I had to be the role model early, right? And so
Mhm.
I didn't, and I don't want to say opportunity, but I didn't ever process the anger and the feelings that I had at a young age about not having a father, the resentment that I maybe had about having to be the man of the house at a young age. And so I kept all that stuff bottled up, and I was very responsible as a young teenager. I was still, I still did teenager stuff, but I was responsible for the most part. I got good grades. I did the right things on the football field. I did the right things, for the most part in the community. Got the opportunity to go to college, and now all of a sudden I didn't have my little brother looking at me all the time. And so that's when all the childish ego, victim mentality type stuff came out, right? And it came out for my first probably 2.5 years of college, where I was a nightmare and I was angry and I was blaming everybody else for my situations and all these things. My grades were miserable. I was barely eligible. And then when I got around, um, I got around the coaches in the coaching community, I realized like nobody's coming to save you, dude. Like nobody's coming,
Mhm.
and when you have that moment and that realization, it happens to most people. It might happen in a bar bathroom when you're a little bit drunk and you look yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh shit, this is my life, right?
Mhm.
Or it might be those Christmas party moments, or it might be whatever it is. Everybody has those moments, right? And I had one sitting with my coach, he had recruited me to play football, and he said, Kitch, at some point you got to learn to be the guy instead of being that guy. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I'm a young kid.
Mhm.
I don't know what that means. Now
Mhm.
that I look back on it, I'm like, oh, he was telling me I need to work on myself. He
Mhm.
was telling me that I need to figure it out, right? And so I did. I had that moment where it was like, nobody's coming to save you, man. It's your life. Like, if you want something, if you want to be different, if you want different outcomes, you got to change the inputs. If you want different outputs, you got to change the inputs. And so I got around people that were reading, and I got around people that were journaling, and people that were meditating, and people that were exploring these edges and doing battle with the person inside. And it's
Mhm.
like, oh, that's the key. It's not an outward fight, right? I've always identified with the fight as me versus the world. No, man, it's me versus me. It's me versus the person that I've been. It's me versus those demons that are in me, right? It's figuring out ways to unlock those or lock them away and then unlock the next level of my potential. Like that's what this game is. And so again, going back to gamifying things, it was like, all right, how long can I sit in this discomfort of journaling and writing about the way that I feel? How long can I sit in this discomfort of acknowledging the fact that the mistakes and the things that have happened in my past are my fault? They're not anybody else's fault. It's my fault, 100%.
Mhm.
My dad not being in my life had nothing to do with me punching that guy in the face on a Saturday night. Nothing.
Mhm.
That was just me being me, right? And so the longer you sit in that discomfort and the more you explore it, you start to unlock things, right? So one of the first rabbit holes that I went down was stoicism, and
Yep.
getting in touch with like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, some of those writings, and they really resonated with me because it was all about taking the emotion out of things
Mhm.
and being able to look at things as neither positive nor negative, just neutral. They're events, right?
Mhm.
And so that kind of unlocked some things for me. And then from there, man, it's just been following the breadcrumbs. It's
Mhm.
been exploring like what are the things that I can do to make myself a little bit better, a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more educated about myself.
Mhm.
So for me now, I go to therapy. I have a mindset coach. I have a business coach. I'm constantly investing in myself to
Mhm.
find ways that I can continue to do battle with the ghosts of my past, but also build the skills that I need to move forward to these next levels of life that I know are coming, right? And some may call it arrogance, some may call it whatever, but I know that this is the beginning for me. And so it's
Mhm.
like I have to keep developing because the levels that I'm going to be playing in are going to get better and better and better, right? And
Right.
it's like Ed Milet talked about it. Like he's like, I got to a point where I was successful, but then I got to a new level and I looked around and I'm like, oh, I'm surrounded by killers. Like these dudes are business assassins. Like I need to
Mhm.
get better, you know? And
Mhm.
so it's like, that's the excitement for me is I'm now at a place where like, I'm obsessed with improvement. Like I just want to get better. I just want to figure out what that looks like. And so, yeah, man, from a specific tactical, strategic thing, I have kind of a system that I do. So I typically read 3 books at a time. So it's one for me, which is just could be whatever. I like to read some of like the military books or some different things, but that's just for
Mhm.
me. There's not really a lot of quote unquote value in it. It's just a story that I like to read. So I have that one going. And then I always have something that's a personal development area for me. So whatever my priority is for that season of life, if it's business, then it's a business book. If it's relationship, then it's a relationship book. If it's psychology, it's a psychology book. And then I always have a third book that has something to do with my business. So that could be, a real estate book. It could be an investment book, whatever, right? But I try and do 3 at a time. And again, does it always work out that way? No. But
Mhm.
I do make sure that reading is part of my daily routine. And then I have what I call a launch sequence, which is every morning I
Mhm.
do something for my mind, my body, my soul, and I try and make sure that's a non-negotiable. My team knows like those things on my calendar are in a different color than everything else because they don't get moved ever. And
Mhm.
so it's wake up, meditate, read, journal, connect with somebody I care about, whether it's a text message, a voice message, a picture, whatever, send them something. And then from there, I got to move my body in one way or another, whether that's training or maybe it's just going for a walk because I'm going to lift later in the day, like whatever. I got to do something, right? And just something for my mind, my body, and my soul. And so that's kind of my launch sequence. And the reason I call it that is because so many people roll out of bed and they grab their phone. Right?
Yep.
Like I don't look at my phone for the first at least hour that I'm awake.
Mhm.
Um, I think that when you look at NASA, right, they don't just flip a box and hit a red button and the rocket takes off. Like it's like, no, this system on, this system on, this system on. So that's for me, that's my self improvement is understanding my systems. How do I turn each of my systems on as my launch sequence?
First of all, this answer went way beyond what I expected. So this was amazing. I was enjoying the philosophical side of things, and you got tactical on me, and I'm enjoying it all. I love this. I'm a big fan of morning routines, discipline, structure in your life. Just again, the psychology of things. A big part of what I want to get out of all these conversations that I'm having with high level people like yourself, high level performers, is their psychology. I've always been extremely fascinated by human psychology. I've always loved biographies. I've always loved sales and human communication, interaction. And I think we have a lot of that in common. And as you were talking, there are so many similarities. And I think offline, we have to have other conversations because so much in common here that I love. But first things first, it's a powerful paradigm shift where you went from trying to fight the world versus this is an inward battle. I've gone through that same chapter myself, gone through that same experience, and I can really testify to what you're saying here. And I think that is a huge paradigm shift for anybody who didn't pick that piece of detail out, I just want to highlight that that is where it all begins. This lifelong learning journey starts when you take that level of personal responsibility. You talked about stoicism too. One of the main things that I got out of stoicism, and I still love all the books and I revisit them all the time, is personal responsibility. It's regardless of what's happening, external circumstances, there's all kinds of craziness and chaos in the world. Everything is crazy. You know, we're spinning on this rock in the middle of this universe. It's all crazy, but I'm going to take personal responsibility for my life, my choices, my habits, my actions, my thoughts. Right? There's a classic saying, it comes from the old, Persian Empire and Zoroastrianism and all of that, which is good thoughts, good deeds. Sorry, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Those are the three basic principles: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. And that's essentially stoicism in a nutshell. You're taking that level of personal responsibility. You're facing the challenges and obstacles and telling yourself, today I'm going to handle what I can handle, and the rest is out of my control. This is like Marcus Aurelius saying, today I will have regular people, hating me or, whatever else, but I'm going to focus on what's in my control. So anyways, I think the important point to highlight here is when you start to realize this is an inward battle. As long as I can work on myself and work on my discipline and work on every aspect of my character, everything else gets better. It's like Jim Rohn used to say, for things to change, you have to change. For things to get better, you have to get better. So it starts with you. So I love that you brought that point up. The second thing that stood out to me is you're reading 3 books at a time. One of my mentors back in the day, he told me, there was a point where I was just confused around my purpose, around what I was doing. Wasn't really satisfied with my position, even though I was making a ton of money for a young kid, but just wasn't fulfilled at all. I just knew this is not the right position for me. One thing he told me is go grab a bunch of books, grab history, military, science, whatever else, and read them at once. All at once. Pick 4 or 5 books and just go one chapter here, one chapter there. Just switch it up. Don't give yourself any constraints. I have to do this cover to cover. He's like, it's important you just get started and get all these different ideas and just start to read, start to delve into that world. And that's what really sparked my reading journey. So it's interesting to me that you said you're reading 3 books at a time. Quick little question for you here. Is there a particular reason you're doing 3?
Not really. It was just one for me, one for me, one for my relationships, my business, my family, and then whatever other area I need to grow in. Part of it, for me, is also I try and read something that is either completely novel to me, meaning I know nothing about it, or it's something that is contradictory to my view, right? And so if it's something like if I hold a belief, I want to read something the opposite of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think it's how you expand, and I think it's how you start to look at things with a different lens, right? And so much of today's world is an echo chamber, right? And even I know you love human psychology, like we gravitate towards what we reflect, right? We gravitate towards what agrees with the internal narratives that we have and the beliefs that we hold. And so to me, I try and battle that as much as I possibly can consciously. Like, oh no, a lot of my timeline is saying the same thing. That's a sign to me that I need to get out of this echo chamber for a second because this isn't helping me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I'm 100% with you there too. You talked about some military books. I had a phase over the last year or so where I just jumped into a ton of military books, from George Patton's, General Patton's biography, to a bunch of older books, to some of the wars and whatnot, to ancient books around military and warfare. So I love all that as well. I'm sure you do, with the strategies and everything you can pull and apply to business. And then the launch sequence is the perfect name for our morning routine. This is the best name I've ever heard. The launch sequence, because you're quite literally launching yourself. And I was going to ask you a follow-up question since you got really tactical. I'm sure you won't mind sharing this. What about the sleep and wake up time? Do you have a specific time you're going to bed, specific time you're waking up, and how important is that to you?
Yeah, so I used to be a 4 a.m. guy just due to strength and conditioning. Like our first group was always at 6 a.m. So you have to be usually in the building by 4:45-ish. So 4 a.m. was usually my wake up. Now that I'm just doing business and I'm an entrepreneur full time, I'm a 5 a.m. guy. As far as bedtime, I try and keep it to 7 hours. That being said, am I perfect? No. Like there's times where I get wrapped up in a show, or I get wrapped up in, reading or doing something, or I want to finish a project. But I do try and keep it to 7 hours. One of the things that I'm really working on now is dialing in my nighttime routine. It's something that I didn't spend a lot of time focusing on. I was always really focused on the launch sequence in the morning, but I've noticed that I need to do a better job of dialing it down at night. So I'm playing with different things right now, working with different ideas, and I'm a big experiment guy. Like I just want to figure out what works for me. And so I don't know what it's going to look like. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm trying to limit screen time 3 hours out. I'm trying to go like the 3-2-1 basically. So it's 3 hours out, 2 hours out, and then 1 hour out, and have checkpoints in each of those of like, these are the things that I'm going to do. One of the things that I like to do before I lay down is just get a little mobility. So just move a little bit, stretch it, like nice and light, nothing crazy, nothing that's going to get my heart rate up, but just enough to like feel a little bit limber, a little bit loose before I go to bed. And then a nighttime meditation. Obviously, I'm big on the temperature and the blackout. Like I want my room cold and dark. Like
Mm-hmm.
and the other big thing that I do is I just don't plug my phone in next to my bed. My
Mm-hmm.
phone is plugged in across the room, away from me. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's something. So the nighttime routine is still kind of still growing and evolving. I don't know specifically what's going to give me the best outcomes yet,
Sure.
but I'm experimenting.
Yeah, sure. I do a lot of this similar stuff as well, a lot of the same strategies. And that question was for anybody who's as curious as I am, wants to get down to the very detail and get all the answers. So I appreciate you answering that. Now, let's talk about getting into psychology. And you said you pursued some of the courses in your PhD and started to go that direction. What made you want to go that direction? Did you already know you want to get into business, but you wanted to get the
Yeah.
psychology degrees and all that as well?
So I got a master's degree in sports psychology. So
Okay.
when I started coaching, like I said, there was that big knowledge gap, and so I was like, I got to get a master's degree. And so I went and basically begged my way into a master's program in exercise science, and I got in. And so they said, you have to have anatomy, you have to have all these things, and I'm like, listen, here's what I'll do. If I fail any of these courses, you can kick me out of the program. Like, I promise I won't fail, because I didn't have any of the prerequisites to get into these master's programs, but I didn't have time to go back for another 4-year degree. And
Mhm.
so they're like, okay, go in. So I graduated with a 4.0 through a master's degree in exercise science. So I get about halfway through this program, and I'm like, okay, I see these sports psychology courses that you're offering. What would it take for me to get a dual master's and do both? And they're like, well, here's what you need to do, blah, 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 blah. So I was like, all right, sign me up. So I ended up graduating with a degree in a master's degree in exercise science and a master's degree in sports psychology. And
Right.
so that was while I was coaching. And then as I got deeper into the coaching and I finished up and I was about to launch Edge Leadership Academy, I was looking around at everybody else in the space, and I'm like, all right, everybody else who does similar to what I want to do with the leadership area and the culture stuff, they have a lot of theory, and then they push a lot of theory. I already know I got 10 years of experience on my back, so I can
Mhm.
give you the execution, but I
Mhm.
have to be able to marry it with some theory. It's got to give me some validity, especially in the corporate space, right? Because
Mhm.
what validity do I have stepping into a boardroom when my 10 years of my business career, 10 years of my career was in athletics, right?
Mhm.
They don't want to hear me just tell war stories about, 4th and 10 in the Coliseum against USC. Like, some guys might, but for the most part, they don't. So I was like, I need something that's going to add validity and give me credibility in these new lanes that I want to move in. And then the
Mhm.
other piece was, as I said earlier, this is the beginning for me. Like,
Mhm.
since I've launched Edge, I'm involved in 2 other companies. I'm in the process of starting our third company now. And so it's like, the more I can understand about psychology, the better businessman I am. So not only does it help me with my core business of Edge Leadership Academy, but it also helps me with just understanding people and selfishly understanding myself. So that's how I got into it. And so literally when I launched Edge, the first thing I did was sign in and get an LLC and get all that set up. The next thing I did was call Liberty University, because I knew they had an online PhD program. Called them, said, "Hey, listen, I have a master's degree in sports psych. I know it's not typical, psychology, but is there any way that I could get into this program and run with it?" And luckily I met with an admissions counselor. They got me in, and so now I've been on that journey for 2.5, 3 years now. And it's a monster, man. It's a monster, but it's so cool. It's expanded my mind so much.
And how's it been balancing that with building the business? And being an entrepreneur is quite a different journey than being a student, right? So
Yeah.
how has that been for you? And has that helped you? Has that just been more difficult and put more on your plate?
So when I came out of the gates, when I first started the business, so Edge had I had a 5-year plan to profitability for Edge Leadership Academy. We were profitable in 6 months, and so I felt like I conquered the world. And I'm like, bro, this entrepreneur thing, done, got it.
Easy
I'm the
work.
king, right?
Easy work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy. So I get an opportunity to open a gym, and this turns into like a little side quest for me. So I get an opportunity to open a gym, and in my mind, I'm like, next step on the entrepreneurial journey, absolutely, let's do it. So I get signed up to open this 22,000 square foot training facility. And I've never opened a gym before. I've never run a private gym. I've had the only experience I have is coaching, and the only business experience I had is running my little rinky-dink 2-man operation that was Edge Leadership at the time. So I get into that. Meanwhile, I'm taking these PhD courses. And so I say that to say the gym closed in 11 months. I walked away net profitable, but was not a win by all other accounts. And I realized I was doing too much. There were I had too many things going on, and you can't optimize for that many things. And so it led me to this point of like legitimate burnout, to where I was having like panic attacks. Like it was just I just had too much going on. And because in the process, I had just finished my first book. I was working on my second one. And so it was like just too many projects, too many wheels spinning, too much going on. So what I did then was I called the university, and I said, hey, if I take a semester off, how much does this set me back? And my admissions counselor was like, do you remember what you asked me when you signed up? I said, no, that was a year ago. It was a whirlwind. He's like, you asked me what the fastest anybody had ever finished it was, and then you asked me to put you on track to do it faster. And I was like, okay. And he's like, so if you take a semester off, you're still 2 semesters ahead of everybody else. Like most people are taking 1 to 2 PhD courses per semester. You're taking 3 to 4. Like you're fine. Take a semester off. So now what I do is I try and alternate where I'll take, during the summer, whenever we're not on the road a lot speaking, that's when I try and take my courses and get that coursework done. So it's a balancing act. It's never perfect, but it's something that's important to me from a legacy standpoint, and looking at my family and saying I want to be the first one with a PhD. Obviously, being an African American male, like, you get into that PhD club, man, there's not a lot of us that have them. And I want to be, a symbol for my community, and for people that look like me to be able to look at me and say, hey, if this dude can do it, it can be done. Because I'm not special, man. I'm not. I just work hard. Like, there's no magic sauce here. I wasn't, I wasn't touched by King Midas or Zeus or anybody. I'm just a dude that shows up every day. So that's how I balance it, or don't balance it, however you want to put it.
Got it. Yeah. So essentially you're prioritizing between the two and kind of going back and forth, which makes a lot of sense. And when you're prioritizing, it's never perfect. Like you said, it's just a matter of figuring out when you can handle both. But that brings us to a really good topic that is of interest to me, because I see this a lot, especially with younger people trying to do it all, trying to do this business and that business and whatever hot trend and jumping on this and that. How important is it not to spread yourself too thin? I have my thoughts on this, and I'm pretty strict on my thoughts and what I commit my time to. I have a few different tests that I run things through, filters, you could say. When we get pitched, I'm sure as you do, on opportunities, joint ventures, partnerships, investments, things like that, every single day is pretty much nonstop, right? And for me, I learned from my first mentor, it's always a no. You always say no first. Then you consider it. And if you want to say yes, then it's a nice, pleasant surprise for everybody, right? As opposed to saying yes to things and getting caught in things. And I've applied that to my personal life as well. It's always a no for everything, events, parties, whatever else. It's pretty much always a no. Mostly because it actually is a no, and I'm working and I have priorities and I can't make time for those things. But if I end up saying yes later, then it's a nice surprise. So I learned that early on, but I feel like that's missing in today's culture with a lot of younger people, especially, and they just want to do it all. They want to do everything. So what are your thoughts on that, on not spreading yourself too thin?
Yeah, I agree 100%, man. I've noticed as I've risen, right, and as I've done certain things and achieved whatever you want to say that they are, again, as a high performer, I never feel like I'm successful, but, as I've achieved things, I guess we'll just put it that way, that those pitches come in and the things come in. And when I first started in entrepreneurship, when I first got into it, I had a rule that I would say yes to everything, because my time was not valuable at that point. I was worth nothing. Right. And so I said yes to everything. And I saw where that got me, right? And it got me in the gym situation. It got me in the situation where I was having panic attacks and I was drawn out. And I was in projects that I didn't care about, and I was partnering with people just to partner. And it just was this nightmare. And I'm like, dude, this is stupid. Like, get back to basics, And so now I'm a junkyard dog over my time and my energy. I'm a junkyard dog, man. It takes a lot to pry me away. And so similar to you, I have filters and I have tests that I run things through. The first one and this is for everyday decisions, this is for pretty much everything, I call it the VMV test, right? So I have my personal vision statement, my mission, and my values, right? So I want to leave a legacy for my family to be proud of. I wear that on my wrist every single day. It says leave a legacy, right? That's my vision. My mission is to inspire greatness in everybody that I come across. I want to bring out the best version in the people that I'm around. My values, I'm honest, I'm caring, I'm driven, and I'm committed to growth. Those are the things that I fight for in my life. They are non-negotiable. So everything that comes across my plate, whether it's a friend texting me, what I eat for dinner, what time I go to bed, all these things, I ask myself, does it align with my vision? Does it get me closer to my vision? Yes or no? Does it allow me to fulfill my mission for the day? Yes or no? Does it represent the values that I fight for in my life? Yes or no? If it's not 3 yeses, 99% of the time I say no. Automatically, boom, decision made. Don't even have to think about it again. It's done. Nope. Don't need to. Don't need an explanation. Nothing. Because if you know anything about me, you know my vision, my mission, and my values. So if you're somebody that I really want to do business with or I really care about or anything, if you know me well enough, then you know that you shouldn't put things in front of me that don't represent those things because you already know the answer. So just don't even bring it up, right? If I decide that for some reason it doesn't fit that criteria, but I'm still interested, I'm still intrigued, then I ask additional questions. And I think this is really, really important for any entrepreneurs out there and any young business owners and people that are just getting started. I ask myself and I get very, very clear, what am I going to sacrifice here? Is it going to be my vision, my mission, or my values? Why am I going to sacrifice it? Why do I still want to do this? And if I still at that point decide that I want to do it, and when I say get clear on this, I mean literally pen to paper. If I decide at that point that I still want to do it, I put an expiration date. How long am I willing to tolerate this misalignment with my vision, mission, and values? And then I hold myself to that. If I have not achieved the outcome that I think is going to happen, that's going to allow me to then get back on the path by the expiration date, I cut it off, cut my losses, cut bait, get out. Right. And so I think a lot of people don't do that. And what happens is you start to do things that pull you from your main path. And all of a sudden you wake up 20 years later and you're like, how did I get here? Like this isn't, I'm no longer on the path that I wanted to be on. Right. So that's one of the things that I use. The other big thing for me is I look at my life as a series of going back to school. Right. And so school is broken up into 16-week semesters. And one of the things that we did as strength coaches was what's called a phase breakdown or an annual plan. So what I do is whether it's 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, I have different names for them. I won't bore you with that, but each one has a different name in my mind, whether it's a sprint, a block, whatever. What I do is I literally have a document on my computer that says, what are we optimizing for during this season? Like, what is this? What is the main priority here? Then from there, I label my keys to success. These are the things that if I do these, I will be successful. I'll be able to look back at this 4, 8, 12, 16, whatever week block and say I was successful in this time, right? Then from there, I start to label out my priorities. And I say, okay, these are the things that I'm optimizing for. These are the key performance indicators that I'm going to use to measure each one. These are the KPIs. This is the checkpoint. This is how often I'm going to measure it. These are the things that I need to do, right? Put that out there. Then I come down and I say, okay, the rest of my things, the rest of the areas of my life, whether it's social relationships, physical fitness, whatever, yada, 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 leisure time, etc. What level of energy am I going to put to that? Because I know that I don't have a lot left, knowing that this is what I'm optimizing for in this time. And then I say, okay, if it's my social relationships, all right, well, then that means for me that this just needs to be good enough. Good enough needs to be good enough. And so what does that look like to me? I want a metric. So it might say, hey, I'm going to see my friends twice this month. I'll pick 2 days. I'll go see them. Right. And then I measure that throughout. And I do the same thing for all my priorities. So I have these phase breakdowns that I use in my life, again, depending on what the goal is that I'm optimizing for at that time. But I think getting crystal clear on what you're optimizing for keeps you from trying to do everything. Because I can say I'm optimizing for this right now. Like this is what I'm optimizing for. So if I'm optimizing for business, well, then that means everything else has to take a back seat. And I don't believe in optimizing for something in an unguarded or undisciplined way. Like I don't believe in just saying, oh, I'm just going to go all in on my business. For how long? What does that look like? Because you got to come up for air. You have to, right? And so to me, I like sprints, I like blocks, I like seasons. I don't like this indefinite, well, I'm just going all in. I'm gonna go
Mm-hmm.
monk mode for the next 6 years. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna come out as a terrible person. Good luck. Have at it.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go 6 weeks. I'm gonna go harder than you can for 6 weeks. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm gonna come out for a week or two. I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna spend time with my family. I'm gonna relax. Then I'm gonna go in for 8 weeks. And in those 8 weeks, I'm going to be a savage in the way that I execute because I'm so clear on what needs to be done, how I'm measuring it, and how I'm gonna manage it.
I love that. Like I said earlier, you're so structured and very much routine oriented with what you do,
Yeah.
and everything's planned
Very.
out and phased out. That definitely comes from your coaching background. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You're coaching athletes, you're working with teams and whatnot. I'm
It
sure.
does. It does. But here's the surprising part. It
Mm-hmm.
actually comes from the fact that inherently I am not a disciplined person at all. It
Mm,
comes from the fact that I know my weaknesses and I know myself. And if I leave myself too much flexibility and too much freedom, I won't get anything done.
right.
Inherently, as a human, I'm not a disciplined individual at all. I'm very impulsive. I'm emotional. Like, I'm not those things. And so I have to put those
Mm-hmm.
parameters in my life to keep me moving towards that. Now, I'm better than I used to be, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
that's why
Sure.
I'm being successful in business and the different endeavors that I'm in. But I still know that if I remove those guardrails, it could go off the wheels. It could go off the rails. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's an irrational fear. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But for me, I know my weaknesses, and so it's like, no, I keep a tight chain on it.
Yeah, I don't think that's irrational at all. I think, as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention, right? It's necessary for you to put those guardrails in place and that discipline in place. I think it's just a sign of self awareness. And it's the
Correct.
same for me. I'm very routine and structured and disciplined as well. And I always prioritize that, maybe overly prioritize it even, because I know if I let that go, just like yourself, I could be very much impulsive or very much just more action oriented. So, I'll go in the
Yeah.
direction that I want to go without too much thought into it. So I need to have discipline, structure, all that in place for myself. Now, I love everything that you just mentioned and that you brought up. One thing that I just want to circle back to really quick is just this idea of spreading yourself too thin as an entrepreneur or business owner. I see a lot of entrepreneurs doing this, even in my own circles. And one thing that I see that is the common mistake is they're mistaking being busy for actually being productive and moving things forward. They think, if I'm launching a new business every day of the week, that means I got 7 businesses a week. That's great. I'm busy. I'm always doing something new. And they mistake that newness for actual progress in the direction that they want to go. So I think something that you have, and I can see that very clearly, and something that I always try to cultivate myself as well, is being very clear on what we're optimizing for, like you've been saying, what the end goal is, what the target is, what direction we're trying to go, and what real progress actually means. Because I could get busy with a lot of things and tell myself, I'm working 16-hour days on 10 different businesses, but does that mean I'm actually becoming who I want to become? And I think that is the key point. I'll actually like to hear your thoughts on this, and we'll start to go into wrapping up this podcast as well. I don't want to take too much of your time, but and I feel like we're gonna have to do multiple parts. I would love to have you back because there's so many other areas that I wanted to dig into today. We have a lot of similar mindsets on things. Um, I wanted to ask you about this idea of not setting goals for just what you want to achieve, but really thinking about who you want to become. And I had this transition in my life where, like you said before, I was the all in type of guy. I'm all in with sales, I'm all in with business. That's all I care about. It's my only priority. And what happens very quickly is you lose sight of everything else, right? You lose
Yeah.
sight of relationships, you lose sight of your health, everything else, right? It just falls to the wayside. And that's exactly what happened with me. Then it came to a point of maturity where I realized, listen, I want to have it all. Who's to say I can't have the perfect relationship? Who's to say I can't be in shape, train martial arts, go hard? Who's to say I can't wake up early and build my business and do all of that? So I decided, as long as I put structure in place, as long as I take a hard look at my days, my time, my hours, it's like back to Stoicism. Seneca, moral essays on the shortness of life. One of my favorite little books of all time. I go through it all the time. I go through that audiobook sometimes 2-3 times a day if I want to revisit that idea. And he always says, we have more than enough time to achieve the highest of achievements if our time was well invested. But what we do is we waste our time. Right. So for me, it was, I can have it all. And I'm going to just look at my time and figure out how I can have it all. So that was a big transition because I looked at who I want to become. And it wasn't, some completely out of shape person with unhealthy relationships with no joy or purpose in life, but just monetary value. Right. And I realized I need to pivot. So what are your thoughts on that? First of all, being clear on who you want to become and then, looking at your time to gear towards that.
Yeah. So going back to what I said earlier about the vision, mission, and values, right? Like, that's how I set my goals. Like, it's very, very simple for me. And I think about it this way. At the end of my life, when I die, my goal is to have the first person that stands up at my funeral and speaks about me to say Kitch left a legacy for his family to be proud of. He inspired greatness in the people around him. He was honest, he was caring, he was driven, he was committed to growth, right? So that's what I'm after. That's my goal, right? The money, the finances, the other thing, to me, that's just a scoreboard for the amount of impact that I have in my life. Now, do I want to find the best vehicle to allow for that impact and to obviously give me the financial rewards and allow me to live the life that I want to live, do what I want to do with the people that I want to do it with when I feel like doing it? Absolutely. For sure. Right. But I'm not strict in what that looks like. I am not strict in what that looks like at all. I'm very much so seeking out opportunities that align with that character that I have for myself. Like, to me, and I was just talking to Matt Vincent about this. I don't know if you're familiar with Matt. He's a stud.
No.
Dude's a killer. But he was a world champion, and now he's into self-development, personal development. He does accountability coaching and things like that. And he talks a lot about, like, it's about the hero's journey, right? Like, it's about writing your hero's journey. And that's where the goals come from. It's just like, to me, my goals get bigger and scarier every single day, you know, because I accomplish things and then I'm like, all right, if I can do this, let me, you know, erase that zero and put another one up there next to it. You know what I mean? Like let's get a little bit crazy with this. Let's see how far we can push this. But ultimately my goal is to be the best human that I possibly can. And that means, you know, impacting people financially, impacting people from a relationship standpoint, emotionally. Like I want people around me to say, not only did Kitch eat, he made sure we ate, and he taught us how to fish as well. Like, he didn't just put us on the payroll and help us out. Like, he helped me become a better man, and become a better father, a better friend, whatever. Like, those are the types of goals that I set for myself. Doesn't mean I don't have, you know, hard money goals. I do. I absolutely do. We all have a number, right? But ultimately, it's a reflection of the impact. And so I don't focus on it as much as I focus on the process, right? To me, it's more process goals. Like, am I getting better at these things? Is the baseline changing? Are the trends going in the right direction? Because if they do, then, and I'm sure you've recognized this too, like one conversation, one relationship can completely change the game for you. And so for me to have a revenue goal of XYZ amount, we'll say $100,000, I could have one conversation and all of a sudden I'm making $100K a month, right? So what was the point of that goal, right? To me, it's be the person that has those types of conversations. And then the goals they take care of themselves.
That's exactly how I feel about arbitrary number goals. It's exactly that, because in a lot of ways, it's almost a constraint. In a lot of ways, and I always talk about this, like long-term goals as well. I went from, when I was younger, setting all kinds of long-term goals, but then realizing I want to have a long-term vision, but I only set short-term goals. And that was a transition that I made, because long-term goals are a procrastination mechanism. I truly believe this. I believe when you tell yourself, I'm going to achieve this huge number or this one big thing, and every day you're just thinking about that and looking at it, but your life doesn't reflect that, it becomes very depressing very quickly, especially if you're a driven person like we are. And like you said, you wanted to get that degree in the fastest time possible. That question is a question I've asked many times. I used to get into different industries, different sales jobs. And when I was talking to, you know, the leaders in that industry, I would always say, you know, what are the highest record numbers? What are the time frames? What are the production numbers? And then I would just set double that target and I would go for that. And sometimes I would hit that and it would be an incredible win and everybody would be, you know, blown away. Sometimes I would miss my own targets, but I would still be way above their targets. So that was always an approach that I had. So for us to look at long-term goals and realizing we're nowhere close to that, it can be very much disheartening. And then besides that, you look at a long-term 10-year, 15, 20-year goal, whatever it might be, and you think to yourself, well, I got a lot of time to get there. By the time 20 years from now, by the time I'm XYZ age, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to be there. But it's just not the right approach. I think when you look at 3, 6, 12-month goals and you go hard and you make those happen, you make progress a lot faster. Yeah. And when you look back at yourself 3 months ago, you're like, who was that person? I don't even recognize that person. And that's really the right metric. So I love that. I mean,
it's also, it's looking at the long-term vision and recognizing, being okay with the cognitive dissonance that shows up where it's not congruent with the person you are now. Like the long-term goal that I haven't even put on paper yet, but it's in here. I'm not the person that's capable of achieving that yet, but I will be. as a
Sure.
result of the process, right? And so that's kind of the mechanism where it has to go
Hmm.
by. It has to come from that accepting of I can set this goal for myself, knowing that I'm going to grow into the person who is capable of achieving that goal. And
Yeah.
that's a byproduct of, like you were saying, the 3, 6, 12-month goals along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You set those bigger goals for who you need to become to achieve that
Yes.
goal.
Yep.
That's exactly it. No, I love that. Again, we didn't really get into any business conversations. That's going to have to be part 2, part 3. I want to ask about your business and all of that. But your story had so many lessons to draw out that I'm not a type of person that can just gloss over things, right? Gloss over little details like that. I mean, for me, everything's in the details. And that's where all the juice is and all the lessons are. And personally, for me, a lot of great reminders and things to focus on and highlight. And I think for everybody listening, there's been a ton of value here. So I want to wrap this up with a question that I ask everybody. And this is a question I used to ask, entrepreneurs, high level guys when I was younger, going to business conferences all over the country and whatnot, and getting in front of people. And I learned a lot from it. And today, I ask this question on the podcast to every guest that we have on. Knowing everything that you know today, if you could go back to your younger self and give yourself only one piece of advice, what would that be?
Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Plain and simple. And then I'd let them figure it out.
I love that. I love that. That's amazing advice. Everything you love is on the other side of fear. I love that. That's an amazing one. That's a beautiful place to wrap it up. Kitch, I'm going to correct myself here. Kitch, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure. And again, I'm more than happy to have you back on over and over again and dig into all these topics. Really appreciate all the value you brought. And I'm looking forward to watching your wins and your successes from afar. Now that we're connected, I have no doubt that I'm going to see you accomplishing amazing things. Thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, brother. This was fun, man. You have a great platform here. I really appreciate you having me be a part of it. And same to you, man. I can't wait to watch you win, brother.
Thank you, brother.